a little bit more regarding acts and facts, and specifically where we were last talking about regarding life, being now more inclined, contemporary, civilized secondary life, of which most of you, I can tell by looking, are a part, regardless of how you hate it. But in this context, and it is, we must say, in a relative manner, and you've just simply got to see it, there's no way to prove it, and it's not absolutely correct as of yet. And the day that it ever did become anything that resembled absolutely correct, then you couldn't talk about it, because then you'd be into a new process. So it's not a conclusion, it is not an end result, but it is this, that things are so arranged nowadays in ordinary life that men are more inclined, because of the needs of life driving it through men, that men are more inclined to be wrestling over the facts that seem to separate them, as opposed to actual overt hostile acts. And as you all may admit last time, men certainly individually are still fighting over, hey, what you looking at? Or how dare you say something bad about Oklahoma? All the way from that to nations fighting. I know all that. That's why I said relative. You just simply need to see that life's own demands are such now that men are more and more inclined to be wrestling. And when I say wrestling over facts, some of it does not even have to be overt enough for you to, every time that you feel as though you have some need to complain about someone else's facts, it's not even necessary, not necessary that you hit them, but it may not be necessary that you say anything. You can just internally say to them, you dumb son of a bitch. Because perhaps you don't want to say anything, because he might not go along with the facts wrestling match. He might then take the other course and want to punch you. But notice it is now more and more, and it's, if you want to look at it this way, I don't want to get you hung up on a wasted corner. You can look at it this way: the more people think, let us say us as opposed to Attila's great-great-great-great-grandfather, that the more people think, the more opportunity they have to think ill of each other. Whereas if we were dealing with Attila's, archetypically speaking, don't any of Attila's estate write me, and don't sue me, but we'll assume that Attila's great-great-great-great-grandfather had, no offense, but let us say just a modicum of intellectual activity. Just a smidgen. So therefore, he did not have much occasion. Anyone who does not think much, it just simply stands to what? Reason that he's not going to have much occasion to think ill of you. He's not going to have much occasion to think of you. But notice, the more you think, which is a part and parcel of being civilized, being part of the establishment of the secondary world, all you've got to have is an increased drive for the intellect to think. And you have right there the potential, the inclination to be thinking of your conflicts, and it does not have to be, even that is the direct hostility that I verbalized for the example of saying, well, screw somebody. It is simply the feeling that we are separate. You hear somebody else's views expressed. They're facts, not their acts. There's another person over there, they're showing no sign of taking hostile action towards you, and they may not be talking to you, but they're talking. They're dealing with facts. In this area of acts and facts, they're dealing with facts. And they're describing their views about something. And internally, you begin to wrestle with them. You may not even say anything as nasty and unbecoming as, well, screw you. But you're simply wrestling with their facts. They're describing their political views. And internally, you're reacting as you're wired up to do, of, well, no. That is more and more the need of life, is the inclination to be wrestling over facts as opposed to actual overt acts that would seem to be the basis of division between people. That the combat is now over the facts that would seem to divide people, relatively speaking, as opposed to the acts that you could say divide them. There is a beautiful example that we've used before. It's TV soap operas. They portray almost exclusively continual struggles over facts. That is, that the people, the conflict, which you've got to have any sort of opera, drama, the conflict is almost exclusively over talk. It's over the characters, it's over one person's explanation, it's over their complaints, it's over their excuses. Now, as always, since life is based upon acts, that even the world of facts, if you want to look at that as being a kind of handmaiden to the secondary world, in the same way that that facts grow out of acts, in the same way the secondary world flows from and grows from the primary world, then there were acts somewhere. But notice, you've seen as much as I have, surely, or even the nighttime shows, but the daytime soaps used to be just a prime example in your lifetime, that they might refer to, two characters are talking. One says, oh, I've been looking for you because, do you know that Fred stole something from Bernadette's office? And they don't even show it, but they just refer it because there had to be some act or there would be no secondary world. There would be no facts to be talking about. But then, what is it? The drama is played out almost exclusively then on them talking. Now, there are ways to look at it. One is, years ago, I'm sure played some part of it. Not that the humans were responsible, but it's cheaper to do. It was all done in the studio. And it was cheaper to talk. Easier logistically than it is to actually show people doing things, to just talk about it off stage about, well, so-and-so, he fell out of a building. And I think somebody pushed him. They don't have to show that. When they had the soap operas down to the point, just a sound stage there, and those buildings up on 57th, 2nd Street in New York, they didn't have to go outside and take out camera equipment and hire a stuntman. They just say, do you know that so-and-so fell out of a building? But don't get hung up, because I'm going to try to get you to see something a little more. Even that is not the energy behind why it was that way. What that did was follow this kind of near five-dimensional symbolism. It took, at one time, what would have been the action, the apparent, well, not the apparent, but the way they told it, the external adventures of a King Arthur, and it moved into the area of the inner drama of Hamlet. It would be from the days of Moore and Chaucer, those kind of stories, to use the British area, wherein the tales that were remembered simply described action. The knights went out and they did so-and-so. One knight asked a dragon, are you a dragon? The dragon said, you talking to me? And it made him mad, so he shot him. It went from that into Hamlet, singing around thinking, I wonder if they're dragons. And if they really are, what do they represent? And if they don't exist, what I think to do is it's something subconsciously about this kind of conflict I feel toward my uncle. Do not discount me bringing up the soap opera, because it is just a prime example, and it's been going on. It's not just a temporal shift that would be going from the 1100s into the 1600s, as per my example of that kind of Middle Age English led into Shakespeare, because all time still being operative coevally, you could bring it right to the 20th century, and you could find your own kinds of parallels going. They continually say that some age was the introduction of psychological drama. So I guess according to what course you were taking in school and what part of the world, and they could say, well, the psychological drama, perhaps, I don't know, but somebody might say started with William James in the United States. If you were in Bulgaria and they still had schools over there, they would be teaching you something else. Because there is no cutoff date, it is a paradigm, again, a reflective paradigm of this nonstop, continual expansion of the primary world of man, the needs of life through man, as manifested in acts which are silent in their pristine state, if that was still possible, if that was still a part of the needed operations of life, to have those sorts of people still on this planet, which obviously life does not need them anymore. They are going the way of intellectual attorneys, dinosaurs. Fill in your own joke. It is a kind of reflective paradigm of the continual expansion of the world in the individual and in groups of people, of the primary silent world that would be acts going into the world of facts, of the facts being like the hamburger extender of acts. That is, I'll just say with no editorial comment, I'm just a figure of speech, as entertaining as the tales of King Arthur might be, let us say. To somebody nowadays more contemporary, that is more in the middle of life's secondary bell curve, they would enjoy Hamlet more. That does not mean, of course, that they're not people, many people, that given the choice between Hamlet and King Arthur, they would enjoy King Arthur. In case you hadn't noticed, the Mutant Ninja Teenage Turtles, which is just a version of King Arthur. I don't know anything about it, but I can assure it's because it is action that is not going into the realm of what's the person thinking or the turtle thinking. So there are plenty of people, as witnessed by the fact that, as far as I can take a good guess, that you have more people showing up for Mel Gibson Mad Max movies than right now. I just heard that he has done his own version of Hamlet. And I think it's a safe, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet you that any one of the 3 or 4 Mad Max movies that he made, I'll just bet, is going to gross more eventually than this Hamlet movie. But still, the point being, as surely you see, there is this continuum. It is not just a cutoff, and it did not happen back in the days of Greece. It did not happen just at the time of the movement in the Western Europe or the British Isles from the so-called Dark Ages into the Renaissance. It did, historically. I'm not arguing that, if they won't call it that. It did happen, and it did happen at the turn of the 1900s in the United States and in Europe. But it's happening now. As witness, I've tried to bring you up to date the Mel Gibson Hamlet movie. The soap operas themselves. It is a continual, gradual process, and the old process, that's what makes a process, you got to remember, as opposed to a conclusion. The old processes have not gone away, which of course is witnessed by the continuing belief that man has a subconscious. And not one person on this planet that ever says that has the least idea what they're talking about. And you don't even notice it anymore. You're not supposed to, but people are on TV, people with beards, people with good haircuts, suits, education, ministers, just everybody nowadays, they just, because it is now a what? A fact. But they just simply say, blah, 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 and they can be talking about, people talking about economics, weather forecasts, things that you would, even 20 years ago, would have been pretty far removed, or 50 years ago, and at least in the Western world, there was still some conflict over, is Freud a communist? Did he just make this up? And Southern Baptists saying, there's no such thing as unconscious. That's the work of the devil. Now, I'm sure that you'd find tent services out here with good old, whatever those churches are, the Roll Me Up Assembly of God churches. And I'm sure you'd hear now some minister railing at life and saying something about, well, I know some people try to do better, but some of you people unconsciously have a desire to drink and cheat on your wife. And it's now just part of the nomenclature. The verbal nomenclature regarding the dynamics of ordinary existence. But it is not something that just happened. It has not gone away. The world of acts cannot go away. The primary world cannot go away. It is operating simultaneously, but it represents a direct paradigm. It is a prime example that people cannot see one reflecting the other any more than they can see the secondary world being an outgrowth of the primary. But it is a living example that is continually going on, showing the non-stop movement of the human intellect, of life through the human intellect. you have a continuing, look at it this way, if you'd like to. You have blue and yellow circuit inner dramas, psychological dramas, coevally existing, not only out there in life, but in the individual. These kind of so-called, let's call them psychodramas going on coevally with the good old red circuit, John Wayne action epics, or Homer, the plain epics, wherein there was no delving into, well, what was Ulysses thinking about? The kinds of people that are interested in Ulysses, or Dirty Harry movies, or Mad Max, they don't give a damn. The guy looks off, the extent, when you're talking about action movies, whether it actually be a movie, or if we're talking about the Iliad. Take a full range, you do not look at John Wayne there. Was he involved with that unpleasantness over at Troy? I can't remember. Well, at any rate, those who are interested in that have no concern if they had filmed at the time the Siege of Troy, or Mad Max, or John Wayne. The action, the red circuit epics, those who are interested have no, the most they're going to give it in the movie, assuming they know what they're doing and it's part of the mainstream, is this kind of action hero. Somebody rushes up and says, Mad Max, or John Wayne, or Dirty Harry, I got to tell you, they have just burnt down your house, they've killed your wife, they destroyed all your clothes, they ruined all your CDs, and they're talking about you like a dog. And here's the extent, it would be somebody, he goes, huh. Where are they? That's the extent of the need for those who are interested, for those who portray it, for that aspect of life that is still operative at the red circuit action epic level. That's it. It's not right or wrong. But it is existing coevally in the individual and in speaking of the city in toto, of collections of people. That is going on simultaneously, and it just varies from person to person. It varies with the whole groups of people from time to time, whether they need more of that, less of that, or they need more of, comparably speaking, what would be yellow/blue circuit psychodramas. That they rush up and tell the hero, they have just killed your wife and burned down your kingdom. And the guy goes off and has a nervous breakdown, or gets real depressed for 30 minutes, and falls into the dreaded soliloquy. They are operating simultaneously, and I was just going to leave this, at least for tonight, and say, you might consider your own life, the way it normally seems to be wired, primed up, the directions that seem to have been running your own, and to consider, by and large, taking those two main production descriptions of either either blue/yellow circuit psychodramas, as opposed to the red circuit action epics, and which one would be the more apt description of your little literary genre life. There is involved with the acts and the facts, there's yet again an extremely arrangement of the efficient use of energy. I'm going to try and bring it out some verbally, not just to point out again the efficient use of energy, because us still being here is proof of it, but because what I'm going to describe, surely you can hear, but it entertains, hides under its skirt a multitude of real cute little children, little kids, that get discussed, debated, knocked about under all sorts of other guises, and it's right close to this kind of mother hen I'm about to describe, under the apparent starting off of notes on additional arrangements of efficiency. It goes like this. that in re the matter acts and facts. The efficiency I was going to note is that if all the struggles of man now were as they were at one time, more or less, if the struggles were now still, let's say, purely physical, that is, purely the acts, if that's what it was, still with men, the great-great-great-grandfather of Attila, if that was still the nature of us, still playing with reality and saying that we would have life more or less we have it now, but instead of us being civilized people, that we were still more or less being driven on the basis of primary needs, and we were struggling over acts as opposed to facts. Consider that if that were still true, of course, if it were ever true, which it was not literally, but if it were true, you're faced with this possibility, that the energy exchanges between men, that is the struggle, could come to an end. Well, if it is simply armed combat, if it were strictly a matter of acts of two armies engaged in overt hostility, then one side can defeat and just totally overpower the other one. And if that was the extent of the energy exchange that life needed that brought these two combatant parties together, then for all intents and purposes for us to discuss it, at least for you to get a view, one side can bring it to a conclusion, can stop the sentence. They just defeat the other one, just trample them. And so in that energy exchange, in that struggle, if it were based as much as possible, and we can say it is, we can talk about it, that were based strictly on physical means, that it were two armies made up of representatives, figures of what would be the great-great-great-great-grandfathers of Attila. Almost no thinking going on. That they just run across each other down at this same water hole, and they begin to really annoy one another. And with almost no thought, just the next time one of them shows up, they kind of look around, all of them kind of related there. You know how Attila and people in the South love to interbreed. They kind of look around, and they just, almost with a grunt, Attila and his hordes, his kinfolk, they fall upon the others. They got to have water. You don't have to think about it much, because every time they come down there and they're real hot and tired from hunting and taking care of their family, they come down, and more they find this other group down there. And just find it. You don't have to think about it. It's just the most efficient way is just kill the bastards. And those you don't kill, at least maybe will scare the hell out of them. They'll go find somewhere else. Nothing personal, nothing to think about. But notice, if that were some widespread, continuing arrangement, it is not the height of efficiency. Not for energy exchanges, not for life. Because within the context that we're describing, which is the only thing you can describe as a context, one side can bring this energy exchange. That's not the way they look at it, of course, because they don't know what they're up to anyway. They think they're trying to get a water hole. But they would, so to speak, inadvertently bring this energy exchange to what would damn near amount to an end. Whereas that's Florida Panhandle sign language for whereas. Those of you that don't know signage from that area. It's whereas if the battle is on a verbal playing field, or on a verbal battlefield, and the combatants are struggling over talking facts, not struggling over something physical, not the actual water hole, but their struggle is now on a verbal field, and it's over facts, not acts, then it literally It literally has no expiration date. All right, witnessed. Witness. Juliet's kin can still be verbally jousting with the surviving Montagues. The Hatfields can still be cursing the great-great-grandfathers of the McCoys. As long as the struggle is based more on a conflict of facts as opposed to acts, you literally have no time limit, because the initial, if we're going to arbitrarily jump in and say what it was, this whole thing started. It was Attila and the Montagues. And we even know which one. It was Attila the First and it was Herbert Montague. And they have all been dead a long time. But we find they have surviving kin that remember the facts. And they are still, at least verbally, jousting over it. Do you not see that that is a more efficient use of energy to just have complaints? Take any, well, it's just all over the world. I don't even have to pick any area of the world and pick out some group, some nationality, some city-state, and some part of them are still going to be complaining about something that happened 100 years ago, 500 years ago, when the so-and-sos invaded us. Think about it. And if you're a disinterested party, if you're part of the hippos there at the convention between the cats and the birds, you think, come on, folks. You got this group down here in this one area saying, our civilization has never recovered since those bastards invaded us and gave us syphilis and credit cards. And the hippos say, well, when was this? And the birds check their records and they say, well, it was 1350 more or less. And the hippos might want to say, hey, ease up. You know, it's the 21st century. Now, why don't you get on with your business? Of course, that's part of the interplay of the energy. It is part of the business, but that's missing the point. Do you not see it as more efficient? Because the hippo could say, you people are nuts. You're still arguing over a conflict that took place, you're trying to tell me, nearly 500 years ago? And the participants say, well, you don't understand. You don't know. You're not part of this. It is a real continuing cultural problem we have. I don't know. We'll never forget. As cats, we've got memories like little steel traps. I will assume that all of you can get past that poor old pitiful swamp of metaphor, even though this happens in life I'm describing, as you all know. None of that is pertinent if you start pushing toward the 5D area, because it's not lapses of sanity. It is not ordinary people being tied up in the past and living with bad daydreams. From that kind of view, an outside observer could certainly say that, but do you not see it is a more efficient use of energy? Because as far as, let us say, that the cats and the birds, these two groups of people, that one come over and invaded another one. Back during the 1500s, of course, in the West they called it exploring. Oh, we just got here, we just discovered this place. And a lot of them caught on. They said, we done heard about some other people down the road here. They said, when these guys come over from Europe and say we're here to explore, that means they're here to eat you alive. But at any rate, I'm not here to teach history. At any rate, let us say that there was an actual conflict. Who are we not to say that this group came in and said, we are the Castilians. That's, for those of you that remember, that's the Visigoths when they changed their name. And they went, no, we never heard of Visigoths. No, not us, we're Castilians. And all the Italians and the Greeks and the Holy Goths and everybody else went, last time we looked, it was nothing but Visigoths over here, and we never even heard of Castilians. But at any rate, it is like you have this group of nice, innocent people And suddenly a group shows up and says, we are the so-and-sos and we're here to help you. You know, we're here, we've discovered you. We're here to help you, and if you have anything worthwhile, will everyone please meet later in the square, and we'll have you killed as efficiently as possible. So, as far as history is concerned, in every given area, there was actually some conflict. That Group A came in and just slaughtered Group B, took them over and all that. So, at one time, there was actual acts of aggression between the cats and the birds. But notice that is gone. And from an outside observation, you could say, well, it's gone, it should be forgotten. In some cases, it does sort of get forgotten. But notice how many times it is not forgotten. But notice it is an efficient use of energy, because the act, or whatever act they describe, the Civil War is a great one. Many people keep pointing out, boy, Southerners is never going to forget that. They keep refighting it. And from certain views, you think, boy, is that nuts? Or, ease up. But you can say, well, wait a minute, the war, whenever it was over, they signed the peace treaty and it was over. The acts of aggression and hostility, they announced, both sides, it's over. But was it over? Not just that war. And here it is, 100 years later? More. They signed the peace treaty and both sides said, all right, that's it. No, it's known as a peace treaty. One side said, all right, we give up. So you think, well, shoot. Now on with some business. And then you get there 150 years later, 500 years later, and this one side is still fighting it. They are still verbally in combat on the battlefield of facts. You do not see the efficiency of that. There's no way to prove it. Even with those kind of real dramatic hand gestures, you can't prove it. Well, by God, it comes close. I'll admit that. But because, well, if I have to point it out, none of this, as always, has any real pertinence to ordinary people. You've got enough ordinary people inside of you that, as intriguing as some of this may be, or sometimes the way it makes you be able to see something in addition to what you were seeing. Notice, at the ordinary level, well, what does it mean? Who would care? But beyond that, I didn't bring it up just to say that. Beyond that is to see that at that level, there is no need for people to see. Because if they saw it at that level to really play with reality, then they would be cutting off this more efficient use of energy of facts. And so they do not see. Memory. The refighting, but you do not refight the acts, you refight it on the basis of facts. And it doesn't have to be, of course, 500 years ago. It could be 2 minutes ago when somebody insulted you up there at the store, or somebody went by in their car, and somebody did something, and you couldn't find them. They were long gone, and so you're not actually involved with any conflict, which is, remember, it's transfers of energy. You're not involved with any potential conflict over acts because you don't know they're gone. They drove off. You're not even sure what kind of car it was. All you saw was the gesture or the facial expression of the guy that went by. But you can continue to engage in conflict. That is, an exchange, a churning up of energy, and he's long gone. And of course, the more extreme examples I was made, the participants of the acts that seem to be the primary basis of your struggle with the facts can be dead 500 years ago. They can be dead thousands of years ago, and you think, well, it's still my duty to hate those mothers. Yeah, I'll never forget that. They may have beaten us, they may have, the Montagues may have misused us, but I hadn't forgotten it. There is a strange, may I say strange? Oh, no. No. There is interesting. They're really two. I wish I could say strange. Now, interesting. Let me give you the first one. We hit on this a little bit last time. But it has to do with in the struggle over facts. And facts being all forms of talk, excuses, rationales, reasons that one person, one group, one person's memory offers up for their acts. That's the facts. They followed the acts. Is the basis that everyone finds everyone else's facts to be unacceptable. That is, they are not conclusive, they're not satisfying, they are not truly, their explanations are not truly explanatory. They simply are not. And of course, then it goes into, with ordinary people, normally a more prejudicial view of it of, well, this is a cheap justification. Or it indeed is, with a slight sneer. That's not a reason that you just gave me. That's a damn excuse. That everyone finds everyone else's reasons unacceptable. But the basis of it is far beyond any possibility of the three-dimensional intellect seeing it. And although we sort of said it last time we were meeting, I want to say it real plain. I can say it real plain, but boy, is it insane. But just in time, we made a rhyme. They're totally unacceptable. I can describe it several ways, but the one I wanted to do. They're totally unacceptable. Everyone's reasons. Now notice we made no conditions. Everyone's reasons, no matter what it is, no matter what the apparent conflicting acts were originally. Once the facts follow the acts, and someone either volunteers or you ask, however it comes about, their acts are then described by their facts. Doesn't matter their race, their religion, their age, their sex, whenever it was, whatever the basis, whether it's political, economic. If you were in any way a part of the conflict, that in any way you are wired and primed up to be interested in it, then the apparent opposing side, their facts will never be acceptable. Their facts never justify what they did. Never, never, never. As an aside, of course, is I can always ask, isn't it interesting that nobody in life ever finds that interesting? If they did, they'd say, well, there's a real good reason. And then they tell you what their reason was. But the unknown basis, the one that is beyond the grasp of polarized thinking, is the reason that the facts are unacceptable regarding the acts that they're explaining, is that the facts, as opposed to the acts, compared to the acts, the facts don't exist. That's why they're unacceptable. And now you know that is a little verbally rich. Because in the secondary world they do, of course, exist, but notice, compared to the acts, the difference, you might say, between the mountain and the mountain is a metaphor. The difference between Attila's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather at one time having punched your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather very smartly in the nose, enough that made his eyes really water, and he didn't forget that. Your feeling now of hostility toward, what was Attila's family names? Anyway. That now you happen to run across his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild, and he finds out that he works at a service station down the street from you, and every time you see him, you think naughty thoughts about him. Right, you do understand that the facts, and if you even brought it up, and he said, well, as a matter of fact, I keep up with my history, and he gave you some story, whatever the hell it was. In a sense, the facts now regarding the initial acts, and it does not have to be that far. It can be the fact of somebody that did something 5 minutes ago, and you say, why did you do that? And they give you a fact why. The fact, relatively speaking to anybody, is not as real as the act. You can't stop and worry about, well, yes or no, or relative, or you mean good or bad. It is simply different things. So, relatively speaking to all secondary polarized insight and thinking, facts, forget good, bad, right, and different. facts are not real in the sense that the acts were. Therefore, and it has to do, it's not a mistake. Woo-hoo. It's efficiency. Doubled and tripled again. The efficiency is no one's facts after the acts took place. No one's facts are agreeable to the other interested parties, but for a reason that no one understands. I shouldn't say reason, should I? Basis. On a basis that no one understands. The basis is that, relatively speaking, the facts don't exist. And I say efficiency. How about even more efficiency? How about efficiency, dare I say it, quadrupled? To take this and then put it in this context, that men abuse and verbally assault one another for flaws that can never be cured. Can you top that? I assume you heard it, that if it's an actual fight, don't let me draw your attention too far back, or it seems too far removed of Attila and all that. Two guys fighting, you and somebody fighting right now out there on the street, the act itself will come, relatively speaking, to a conclusion. The guy will whip you good, or you whip him, or maybe even kills you, or you kill him. The act can come to an end. But if the act just, maybe you exchange a few blows, or some good threats, or maybe he pushes you a little, and you got a few friends to where you can back up to him and say, hold me, don't, before I kill him. I see you got some people here from Alabama and New Jersey and El Segundo. I know who you are. So let's say the act is over. You never even see the guy again. But for, let's say, at least hours, let's just make it reasonably. You and your friends go off to have a few drinks. And if this was ordinary people, then we'd say, well, psychologically, the guy I just described, he would probably then feel that his macho quotient had been probably damaged, and so he's got to have a few drinks, and then you start this kind of stuff to your buddies about, you guys shouldn't have held me. All right, is there any chance, wait, let's pay the bill, let's go back and see if we can find that guy. And of course, you don't find him. But although those descriptions are all right at the secondary, childish level, there is more involved in that. And what's more involved is what I'm talking about, is now you've got complaints about that guy. You have a few more beers, and the beers and being your buddies ain't the point. I'm just trying to make it nice and crude and simple so they can slip up on you. So you could stand there and go, did you see the way that son of a bitch just came up? He had no nerve to come and talk to me like that. Your buddy, yeah. It doesn't matter what's going on. The thing is, you have complaints about the flaws in this other guy, and there is no way that they can be rectified. Not just because you can't find him, but that now seems to be part of it. Because that's a great transfer of energy, not to be able to get your hands on anything that would resemble an act, which is one of the great uses of memory, is have complaints about people that are dead. Have complaints about acts that are so far gone that they can't ever be rectified. But it can happen, and it doesn't have to be 100 years ago. It doesn't even have to be an hour or so ago that this guy insulted you. It can happen almost as fast. That you just have complaints with somebody. Not their acts. It's on the basis of their facts. But the efficiency is those kind of complaints about the flaws of others. The beauty is they cannot be cured. I think some of you must get a suspicion. It's such an efficient use of energy. I was trying to think of another. How about the electricity that comes into your home, condo, apartment, for those of you living in the back of a Dodge, you plug it. At any rate, how about the energy comes in, but what? I'm going to have to do this fast because this is really going to hurt. Let's say the energy is coming in and you couldn't live without it, but you're not sure of it. And what you think is it's annoying and you won't get rid of it. And the bill comes in every month and you think if you pay the bill that they'll stop annoying you. except you can't pay the bill. I know that hurts. Or you send in your money and nobody ever responds. They just keep sending you this electricity. And you feel like, well, if I could just... What's wrong? Do you feel like it should come to an end somewhere? That there's you got some complaint with Georgia Power or Con Edison or Pacific Gas and Electric. It's the efficiency that all humans, on the factual level especially, we're talking about now, especially, more and more is this the prime basis of this kind of movement of energy, is you have complaints regarding other people's facts. That is their explanations, their stories, their theories, their beliefs. And you look at them as flaws, or errors, misjudgment, a certain amount of ignorance. But the efficient use of energy is they cannot be cured. I think you're wrong. If we just had better education, right? You're surrounded by it. You're surrounded by the cries that, wait a minute, all of the cures, all the flaws of humanity can be cured. There is even, we got a few minutes, I was going to threaten to take it further. There's even a more, what was the one I couldn't, strange. All right. Real interesting. Not strange, because that's definitely on the list. But after having said all that and described all that, note there is something else going on that's far beyond any possible realm of three-dimensional reason, logic, sequential lines of usable thought based upon what we have done already for 50 minutes. Just have to be able to ignore it. There is something else that goes on that is not noted. And that is, still in the area of acts and facts, that in a certain way that is beyond any sequential reason or logic, but there is a certain way in which men can actually live better, in the full sense, live better, tolerate, that men can actually live better with someone else's unappealing, annoying acts better than they can their annoying, conflicting facts. The more and more that you are just ordinarily civilized, which all of you are, it becomes a point that it is easier to live with a partner's and to tolerate a partner's slovenly habits and stinking feet better than you can their extremely provocative and annoying, incorrect political views. Isn't it, to all of us, heartwarming at times to have something so interesting and so absolutely logical, and still some of you can hear it. Even when I point out to you, it can't be proven, and it just... And yet you hear it. It is a fact. Well, it's even represented. It goes on. Nobody knows it again, but if you just think about it a second, it's going on constantly in movies, television. It's just portrayed all the time, but it is a fact. And I have no doubt that some of you have actually lived through it, but it just goes on. It's just part of life that you could actually live, let's say in a sexual situation, like with another person. Another person have acts that if we stopped the whole little episode, at the time you lived with so-and-so, some guy or some girl, and there were things, their acts that just apparently drove you to distraction. That they would not bathe enough. That they just threw their clothes down, they'd never washed dishes, something that actual acts that you would say, I don't know how much more of this I can stand. And yet, some of you, the way you laughed, you already heard it, so I'm not back trying to convince those of you that are already converted and heard it. But there is a certain quite real way that's unnoticed that humans can more and more live and tolerate unseemly, unappealing. I'm just taking one person's view, I'm not questioning it. Their complaints about the unseemly, annoying, irritating acts of somebody else better than they can. Back to my situation, you might say, what happened to you and so? You guys were living together last time I was out here. Yeah, we finally split up. And you might be thinking, well, that's right, you used to complain that he would bathe like once a month. Now, I tell you the truth, it wasn't that. He did stink, but the sex was so good. Well, at times sex was so good, and I kept splashing aftershave on him. And so let us say that you give a curious look, like, well, what happened? They say, I tell you the truth. He was, for a while, he called himself, I wasn't even sure what it meant, but he called himself a neo-California Marxist. And the more he talked about that, and so let's say the sex doesn't matter here, the gender, but I seem to have been speaking for a woman, and let's say this woman says, well, finally, just that's all he talked about. And it's, I didn't have that strong feelings necessarily politically, except what he was talking about, and she didn't even know necessarily how to say it, or it doesn't matter. But do you follow that the truth is, in a certain unnoticed way, that they could tolerate, they could live with annoying, unseemly, smelly, disturbing acts more and more so than they could the same kind of disturbing, unseemly, unacceptable from them facts. Is that not interesting? And as I said, that's even portrayed in movies. I mean, the reality of it is played right there and you just never noticed it, and you've been through it, very likely, and never noticed. And yet everything logically, there is nothing in the ordinary world of intellect to support that. And yet when you can begin to see things, you see it. Because I can stand right here and argue it the other way and prove it and just shoot all that to pieces. That is not true. That people's theories, there's no doubt, conflicting political ideologies or religious beliefs, there's no doubt it annoys people and sometimes can actually inflame them to the point of setting fire to overt hostilities. But to say that in some way that people now can tolerate annoying, hostile, aggressive, conflicting acts better than they can facts, that's insane. I mean, if it did happen, the person involved would be insane. Because a theory is just a theory. An idea is just an idea. It may be annoying, there's no doubt about it. But that is not the same thing as somebody who actually engages in behavior that harms you or at least annoys you. It's not the same thing. It's not even comparable. I repeat, it is a very interesting and impossible to ordinarily see fact that more and more men can live with, abide with, tolerate unseemly acts as far as you're concerned, the person. More so than they can unseemly facts. And as always, the Home Office wants me to point out, nothing's wrong. It's not an attack. It's not us pointing out, ha ha ha, we caught life with its pants down again. No, you caught life in the saddle. You caught life with its jeans down around its hips, swaggering. That aspect, we're out of tape. It's a good place to stop. But that reality that I think enough of you heard, that the examples are just everywhere, but except they're never noted. It's just part, like I said, you can think of movies and TV shows that this is shown, but you never even think that there's something that life is doing there. It's just like, well, that was part of the action. That was a kind of the development of that character, the interplay between them arguing over it. It's much more than that. It is, again, a reflective paradigm of the movement, the continuing movement of the development of the human nervous system. Getting to the point to where you can live with, in the widest sense of the word, that you can, in a sense, live with other people's unseemly, annoying, conflicting, combative acts, more so than you can their facts. It has just energy efficiency brought down there to the 5-dimensional level.